So I do a TV show. It's called Reality Church. We have guests. It's a Believers Variety talk show. And we do dances, and we have artists, and we have keyboard and vocals, and we have teachers and testimonies. But the most important thing is to really talk about how your life has changed because you asked for help.
Anytime my heart turns from darkness to light, anytime temptation comes and someone stands to fight, anytime somebody lives to serve and not be served, I know.
Feel free to get up and move around. Wear your mask.
Hallelujah, God is on the move in many mighty ways. God is on the move, hallelujah. God is on the move today.
You're welcome on the courtyard up here as well.
Anytime in weakness, someone falls upon their knees, or dares to speak the truth that sets them free. Anytime the choice is made to stand upon the word, I know. God is on the move, hallelujah. God is on the move in many mighty ways. God is on the move, hallelujah. God is on the move too. God is on the move, hallelujah. God is on the move in many mighty ways. God is on the move, hallelujah. God is on the move today. You're on the move, I see a generation standing on the truth in each and every nation. God is on the move, yeah. I see a generation standing on the truth in each and every nation. God is on the move. Anytime the gospel stirs a searching soul, and someone says, "Send me," here I go. I know. God is on the move.
Oh yeah.
Hallelujah. God is on the move in mighty ways. Yeah, God is on the move.
You're looking good.
God is on the move. Yeah, God is on the move. can stop you. Nothing can stop you. Change faith. Let it rise, God. Oh, that's good. You're on the move. Let it rise, let it rise. Let it rise.
See what you can do, oh God, a wonder. Your power has no end. The things you've done before, in greater measure, you will do again.
There's no prison wall you can't break through, no mountain you can't move, all things are possible. There's no broken body you can't raise, no soul that you can't save, all things are possible. Darkest night, you can light it up. Light it up, oh God of revival. Let hope arise. Death is overcome. You've already won, oh God of revival.
Rose in victory, and now you're seated forever on the throne.
So why should my heart fear when you've defeated? I'm trusting you, Lord. 'Cause there's no prison wall you can't break through, no mountain you can't move. All things are possible. There's no broken body you can't raise, no soul that you can't save. All things are possible. The darkest night, you can light it up. You can light it up. Oh God of revival, let hope arise. Death is overcome. You've already won, oh God of revival. There's no prison, there's no prison wall you can't break through, no mountain you can't move. All things are possible. Do it, Lord, yeah. There's no broken body you can't raise, no soul that you can't save. All things are possible. The darkest night, you can light it up. You can light it up. Oh God of revival, let hope arise. Death is overcome. You've already won. Oh God of revival, God of revival. Woo, you're on the move, Lord. Revival's in the air. Let's declare this next
given a gift, this ring, where it's a spiritual warfare ring. It says ha 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 all around it. And God gives us many weapons for warfare, and worship, joy, healing the sick, prophesying over people, acts of kindness. You know, that those are all things that destroy the works of the devil. Water's nice. 2015, I had a pretty crazy encounter with God in my kitchen. I was in my kitchen getting a snack. I just got done doing like 3 conferences with Heidi Baker, saw crazy stuff happen, and I drove 7 hours from Pismo Beach to Redding, California. It's 11 o'clock at night. Wasn't thinking like, okay, now is the time for an encounter. I just wanted a little snack after driving 7 hours, preaching twice that morning, and preaching like 8 days before, just constantly every day preaching. And I was just like, all right, it's time to take, I'm finally home and the whole deal. And this angel shows up in my kitchen, touches me in my heart, and I get taken up to heaven, and I see the Father. He hands me these scrolls to eat. One of the scrolls says authenticity, another scroll says vulnerability, another scroll says presence, and under it, present. The Father says to me, one of your greatest mentors in life will be your daughter, Brielle, who was 7 months old at the time. And she's taught me, you know, how to be present. And she taught me a lot of many things. And then the Father says to me, Chad, there's another Jesus People movement that's about ready to happen. And I want you to begin to learn more of the language of heaven and how to articulate the gospel to a generation that's never heard the gospel in their language. So that was in 2015. And the Lord told me that to study the 60s, to study, you know, Jesus People movement kind of happened in 69, 70. So the Lord says, I want you to study the 60s before the Jesus People movement. What was going on in culture, what was going on in music, what was going on in government, what was going on in media, what was going on with the generations rite of passage of baby boomers and how they were being met by the World War II generation, and they were being labeled rebellious, you know, those long hair freaks, those hippies, those, you know, and study the church and what was going on in the church. And I had actually preached this, I think, a good 3 or 4 years ago with you guys, and just talking about there's another Jesus People movement where a generation is going to encounter another level of Jesus. Well, you know, that was in 2015, and then one of the first places I went to that the Lord told me to pray was to go to Coachella. So I went to Coachella in 2015. For maybe some of you don't know, it's a music festival, and it's about 250,000 people show up, and it's just crazy stuff is happening, and it was one of the best places to intercede for a generation. And I don't have time to go into, you know, all the different aspects of what I preached on 3 years ago, but I feel like it's relevant where Chris Overstreet calls me and says, hey, there's like a Jesus People movement that's happening right now. It's all over you, Chad, you know, and it's all over California. And I just want to hit a couple of those points, and then we'll just kind of see where we land. Which is really cool that tomorrow's Father's Day, and we all know like the different moves of God that have happened that started on Mother's Day and Father's Day. Obviously, Mother's Day with Lonnie Frisbee at the Vineyard in 1980, you know, where the Holy Spirit broke out. And then there's you have the Father's Day outpouring at Brownsville, which I went to. That was Steve Hill and John Kilpatrick, Linda Cooley. I went, that was in 95, and I went in 99 to Brownsville and ended up going to their school ministry in 2000. And so that move of God actually got started on Father's Day. So there's something special about Father's and Mother's Day with the Lord, because if you look at the last scripture of the Old Testament in Malachi 4:6, it talks about God pouring out His Spirit where the hearts of the fathers would be turned towards the children, and the children's hearts turned towards the fathers, or else I'll come and curse the land. And then He doesn't speak for like 600 years. Every preacher knows you save your best point for last. So God speaks and then doesn't speak. Like this was His last point of the Old Testament. This is how the Old Testament ends. He's saying, I'm coming with a move of my Spirit where the hearts of the fathers be turned towards the children and the children's hearts towards the fathers. And that was such an expression of what happened in the Jesus people movement, where a generation began, to feel like there was room, there was articulation of the message of the gospel that broke through religion. That, what was going on back in the day of the 60s in the church was you would have to normally wear a suit. You couldn't have long hair as a guy. You would have to wear a dress as a woman. You had to do these various things like drums. People were terrified of the drums in the church because of what, a lot of witchcraft and it was associated around drums. It wasn't so much the guitar, it was more the drums. But I mean, if you look at, let me just hit on that really quick. When the Jesus movement began and Chuck Smith, he asked his son-in-law to pick up a hippie because he was like, hey, I need to talk with a hippie. I need to figure out, just how to minister to this group. And he was a Foursquare pastor of 60 people, and his son-in-law picks up Lonnie Frisbee, which is pretty crazy. That's not a coincidence. That was totally orchestrated by heaven, and how we all know that Lonnie was so led by the Spirit. And so, Lonnie jumps in there, and shares the gospel with Chuck Smith's son-in-law. Then Chuck Smith's son-in-law is like, I need to bring you to, my father-in-law is a pastor. And then the Jesus people movement happens. And when it started happening, they said, hey, you can come barefoot, you can come with, long hair, you come as you are, became one of the mantras, one of the phrases, one of the trademarks of the Jesus people movement, come as you are. And when that started happening, the elders of the church started complaining because they got new carpet, and they were telling Chuck Smith, hey, we need to tell these hippies that they've got to wear sandals, they've got to keep the sandals on, they got to wear shoes, because the oils getting into the carpets, wrecking the carpet. It goes, well, I guess we only have one option then, rip up the carpet. Yeah. Which is such, yes, all the leaders know in here that is a good leadership move right there. Do we want a move of God, or do we want new carpet? Like Bill Johnson has a famous message, there's no poopless cows. Where there's many oxen, there's going to be a mess in the stalls. And so we have to, it's okay that revival is messy for the right reasons. And so anyways, understanding, let me just hit this point again of just referencing, obviously we have the civil rights movement, which was, so big in that time, and it took so much ground, for social justice. And here we are in this time of age. And then we have, I talked about Coachella. And if you understand, music festivals were not popular in the 80s and 90s. They weren't popular at all. They were very poorly attended, very few were happening. And then something happened in the late 90s, early 2000s, where all these music festivals started popping up because a generation, obviously people vote with their money and their feet. And so people that started having demand for more music festivals. Well, to understand Woodstock, because there was so much, there was so much separation and divide between the generations at that time, that they would call Woodstock or different peace rallies anti-American. That they called Woodstock an anti-American music festival. I remember watching a news clip of an anchor, news anchor saying, hey, you might want to look in your teenager's room. If they're not there, they'll probably have this anti-American music festival, burning the American flag, running around naked, taking acid. And they were calling it anti-American, but we all know about one of the aha moments of Woodstock was Jimi Hendrix playing the Star Spangled Banner on his electric guitar. Thank you. And right here at Woodstock, where that was a generation's moment of their rite of passage, saying that's what my America is going to look like. Now, America has obviously changed. You go to Coachella, you go to Lollapalooza, you go to Outside Lands down the road, you go to all these different places, which I've been, where God has told me, hey, I want you to intercede and I want you to start preaching the gospel in their language. And so you find out EDM is a sound that a generation is responding to. And if you were just to look, I feel like I had a dream in 2016, which is actually, we're on the doorstep of the dream that I had, being Big Sur. I had a dream in 2016 that I was in Big Sur. I was stand-up paddleboarding, which is a sign and wonder in itself because I'm a surfer, and surfers in the 2000s did not stand-up paddleboard. but we have progressed, and we've received the new things. And so, anyways, I'm stand-up paddleboarding, and literally I'd only stand-up paddleboard twice in my life. You know, just was like, well, anyways, stand-up paddleboarding, and these two healing angels come down with paddles, and they start stirring the waters around me. I start spinning in a circle, then suddenly the oxygen, the air, turns into like tangible healing particles. And I start breathing in healing, and then suddenly this cloud of healing forms over the water, then goes over California, then over America, then over the world. And I hear the Lord say in the dream that it's time for you to come out of the closet and tell people you're an intercessor. And so the Lord really began to, you know, really woo me in, invite me in to create like new models of intercession. So what birthed out of that was a ministry called Catch the Wave out of this dream, where we've done, we do wow services, worship on water, and we just go get some janky guitars and some djembes or whatever, and we just paddle out past the waves and we worship. There might only be 10 of us, there might be 40 of us, but it's crazy how many people get saved, how many people ask us questions. We're like, this is a spiritual thing, can we join you? We're like, yeah, join us, come on, let's go. And then we do a beach cleanup, and we call it a prayer meeting. And then we do a feeding where we'll cook up 200 hot dogs and say, would you like a free hot dog and prayer? And it's amazing, you know, that whole deal. But to hit the whole deal of like EDM and music, I've been studying intercession, and we see how one of the most powerful places of intercession is dance. And yet a whole generation is it's not so much, you know, like the rock and roll, the whole deal. It's this EDM where they are all just dancing like crazy, and how the Lord wants to raise up intercessors. And so I'm actually, this is a project that I was hoping to do this summer, but, you know, things kind of got pushed back a little bit. But I was in talks of fundraising to get 100 headphones that sync together so that we can do Holy Spirit intercession dance meetings. So that we could go on the beach, do beach cleanups and dance and intercede, but also we go to a Azusa Street revival where it's a parking lot and we just all go dance. Like if you understand, like if you go to LA, New York, various different places, you'll see these, you know, places where people are hooked into their headphones and they're all dancing because there's the noise compliance, all that stuff, that they have free reign to just go crazy, and they can have it be as loud as they want without, you know, disturbing anyone. And so I'm like, oh, this game on. Let's do like 100 people dance intercession meetings, you know? And so anyways, be praying for us for that. But I know that I could feel it in my spirit that we're in like the beginning stages of a Jesus People movement. That I mean, you see everything that's going on, you know, with circumstance. Yes, I'm so excited that I'm getting like cheers from the bushes and the whole deal, and I love it. And you know, it's just, you could feel it in your spirit, like that there is, like, we are in the middle, the beginning of history. That if you study history, you start seeing like the bubonic plague birth in that generation the Reformation and Renaissance. The bubonic plague, when a generation overcame that, and they you know, that it birthed a place of innovation and creativity that took them out of the Dark Ages. And there's no way you would have had the Reformation if you wouldn't have had the invention of the printing press. Because the printing press allowed everyone to begin to read the Bible for themselves. So it's this whole place of empowerment, this whole place of, you know, that you can connect with God, you know, and read the Bible for yourself. That's one of the catalytic tools that really birthed the Reformation. And you know, and you look at John G. Lake, where he goes over to South Africa, and there's a pandemic that happens. People are dying, and the most susceptible way to get that pandemic, to get that disease, is by burying the dead. And so everyone that was burying the dead died. And so they were like, that's a death sentence. Like, no one wanted, the dead bodies were piling up, and John G. Lake's like, if everyone else is scared, I'll go out there and bury the dead. So he starts burying the dead, and everyone's like, you just signed a death sentence, all this stuff. He's like, what are you talking about? Greater is he that's in me that's in the world. I will not, like, you know, succumb to fear. He said, go get the disease. And he had scientists with microscopes where they put the disease in his hand and they watched the disease die. They watched the disease bow to Jesus. And you know, what would John G. Lake be doing if he was alive today? You know, that we have to understand that we're alive for such a time as this. And, you know, in February for me was an amazing month. Just incredible. Got to go to Australia, New Zealand, but just what God was doing with, you know, just words that I've been carrying for 15 years started coming to pass. And that's kind of like some things to be like observation, connecting the dots. When you have prophetic words that you've been stewarding, who here has some prophetic words that have been 15 years or longer that you've been holding on to? Sweet. So there's a good half of you. And I love that. I love it when you start seeing the prophetic words that you've been carrying for 15 years. They start coming to pass. And that's what really was happening. I mean, I remember hanging out with Bob Jones in 2004 and 2005. And he'd be like, yep, Kansas City's going to win the Super Bowl, son. You just wait and see. And that will be the beginning of the Bill and Show harvest. So Bob would tell me that. And then suddenly you have, you know, the Kansas City Chiefs. I mean, it's crazy. Sports Illustrated says the kingdom has come. Like, I mean, I don't know what better do we need than the Sports Illustrated saying the kingdom has come. And so anyways, February, you know, I went to Australia, so I started kind of, you know, observing what was going on in China, and I jumped the day after the Super Bowl win. February 3rd, I went to Australia, and I started seeing everyone with masks, and I traveled around domestically in Australia, and like half the people had masks on, half the people didn't. So I started looking up, you know, coronavirus and the whole deal and praying into it. And yes, look at that! Kingdom come back.
It says literally, kingdom come back.
Yes.
Come back. Yes.
Come on.
That's it. That's from Sports Illustrated. Yes.
Yeah, leave that up. So good. Yes, I love having this be a centerpiece of my preach. And so, you know, you have to understand, like, first of all of this, I mean, like, the timing couldn't be so good, like in the sense of this is amazing timing, but we have to understand when he does speak and when he does begin to have his words come to pass, that those should be nutrients for us, that those should be like to sustain us to go into the promised land, to not be in fear of, oh, why did God bring us all the way to the doorstep of the promised land? This is Numbers 13 and 14. Why would God take us all the way to the doorstep of the promised land only to be killed by these giants? Let's go back to Egypt. Let's go back to slavery. But we need to understand that the fire by night, cloud by day, the fresh manna, the quail, all of that was nutrients in our hearts to soften our hearts, to have faith that if God is with us, who can be against us? And when, you know, so I was praying into the whole coronavirus thing before it was like, you know, national news and the whole deal in the beginning of February. And the Lord says, Chad, I'm taking you into a season where you and the church will begin to learn at another level, a deeper level of how not to react from the spirit of the air, from the second heaven, but also to be anchored into my nature. To be anchored into my nature. And so, you know, I came back, I did like the Catch the Wave tour where we stopped off at Pleasure Point, and we went on all the way down to San Diego in February 20th through the 22nd. And then I jumped on another plane February 27th to New Zealand, came back March 10th. And then, you know, mid-March, everything shuts down, and I show up to grocery stores, and, you know, there's no chicken burritos. Trader Joe's has these chicken burritos that I love, and I would show up and they'd be gone. You know, like show up to the grocery store, oh, and there'd be no toilet paper. You know, like I watched two ladies in their 50s fist fight over the last roll of toilet paper. Like, you know, like these are just moments that you never thought you would witness, and the things that you would see people fight over. You know, and so I'm just like kind of, what is screaming at you when you go to the grocery store and there's no, you know, chicken burritos, or there's something on the shelf that you thought would be there and it wasn't there? What is screaming at you is scarcity. Scarcity is screaming at you. And so what is the opposite spirit? How do I be anchored into his nature, where I begin to anchor into a Father that has given me everything, that I live in abundance, that it's John 10:10, that Jesus gave his life so that we might find it, and that we would have life abundantly. And so whenever there is scarcity screaming at me and I move out of abundance, what does that look like? That looks like, you know, being a spiritual son of Heidi and Roland Baker, who's written a book called There's Always Enough. and being with her in Mozambique and various other countries where we've seen food multiply. We've seen Christmas presents multiply. So when you have lived in that kind of reality, you've had those kind of nutrients hitting your spirit and your heart, that when there's no chicken burritos, you go, okay, I move out of abundance. And one of the ways of abundance is generosity. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go buy someone's groceries for them, because I don't live under scarcity or fear or lack. I live in abundance. So how can I be moving out of abundance and moving out of a generosity, an opposite spirit where people are feeling like they got to hold things in? I'm going to let things go because I have confidence in a Father that is my provider, that I don't need to worry about tomorrow, that the birds of the air are being fed by the Father. I mean, this is all Matthew 6, that He's going to take care of me. And so therefore, I'm going to take care of others. I'm going to go buy that person's eggs. I'm going to go buy that person's chicken. I'm going to go buy that, and so I would do that every time I would go to the grocery store, and I'd find out, one of my things on the grocery list is all out. I'm like, all right, that's it. I'm buying someone's groceries. And so the Lord would begin to just, whenever I would feel fear of okay, because there really is a spirit of fear, unlike I've experienced in a long time, that's over just not our nation, but over the world. But there's a spirit of fear. So the opposite of that is courage. The opposite of that is boldness. That every time that you saw Israel hiding in caves, self-quarantining, that they were hiding in caves, it would usually take one that moved in courage and boldness that broke the spirit of fear over the land, over Israel. You have it with Jonathan and his armor bearer, where they're hiding in caves in fear of the Philistines. And he's like, you know what? I think I got a God idea. Let's go up to the Philistine encampment and take them out. Which military strategy, that was the stupidest move. Hey, we're going to yell out to them and give away the element of surprise. And if they say come up here, then God's given them to us. And then they're fighting uphill, which is not a good tactic. But then they totally, take out the enemy and then break the spirit of fear. The same thing with Goliath, where he is taunting the armies of the living God for 40 days, and all they're doing is listening. All they're doing is never mind. I was about ready to make something, but they're sitting in their tents watching the news, looking at social media, just listening to the enemy. I'm not saying the news and the media is the enemy. I'm just saying that you have to watch the spirit that begins to happen if you watch certain things and the spirit behind it. But anyways, I was just felt like I needed to hit that point. But here's the deal is David comes out of the presence, comes out, from shepherding, and he sees this unclean Philistine. He's like, man, who is this guy? I'm going to take him out. No one else is going to take him out. And David's brother is like, I know why you came here. You came here to be a spectator. You came here just to watch. You came here and you left your responsibility and you just came here to be an observer. And he looks at his brother. He's like, no, I don't have time to argue with you because you're trying to give me the wrong kind of impartation. What's consuming your life, because that's what you've done for 40 days. You've just listened to Goliath and you just let him taunt. It's like, man, I'm going to go run into battle. And David runs with courage. He runs into battle, and we need to be people that run into battle with boldness, with courage. And it's courage that breaks that spirit of fear. And, just hitting that whole deal of, I feel like there's an invitation to discover His peace. The opposite of fear is peace. That the world is looking for us, that we are so connected to the Prince of Peace, that would be one of our greatest, signposts of, hey, you want to be delivered from the spirit of fear, where fear is consuming you. That we see it just the understanding of social distancing. I'd rather it be physical distancing and not social distancing. But, how people are so isolated. If you actually look in New York, where family members died from COVID-19 or died during the epidemic of COVID-19, they weren't allowed to bury their family members. And for those that weren't allowed to bury their family members, you were at a 50% higher risk of suicide or drug addiction. Like Dayton, Ohio is one of the epicenters of the opioid crisis that's been going on for a good 15 plus years. That they are, the month of March, from 2019 to 2020, the study has just come out that they've seen a 150% increase in drug overdoses. That was one of your epicenters. Dayton, Ohio. Already it was, I mean, we have to understand, like, the opioid crisis. So I'm just giving you a couple of things. Are you guys okay? You guys are doing good? You have to look. See, the deal is you look in the 60s and you see where the enemy was taking out a generation. You know, you can see it in whether it be, you know, free love, you know, this whole deal, this whole concept. As long as I don't hurt others, you know, then I'm good, I'm golden. But it began to destroy people's lives. You know, that you know, it really is, to go even deeper, and I don't have time to go like to the depths of this, but it really comes from the Satanic Bible. Do what thou wilt is the whole of the law, is the first commandment of the Satanic Bible, is do whatever you want, just as long as it doesn't hurt people. And so there was just a real, you know, deal there, but you see what was going on, what's been going on in millennials, where I found out I'm a tweener, so I'm like a millennial and a Gen Xer. I was born 81. And I guess those that were born 78 through like 82, or, you know, they're like tweeners. So that's what we are. We're tweeners. And so anyways, I've been just studying, you know, what's been going on with, you know, millennials, and it really started from a dream that I had in 2016. I had a dream where Jesus was washing the feet of three men, and I could see the backs of their heads. And I could see Jesus kneeling down, and he's motioning for me to kneel down next to him. I kneel down next to him, and I look up, and there's the face of a baby boomer, Gen Xer, and millennial. And Jesus is washing their feet, and I begin to wash their feet with Jesus. And then Jesus looks at me, and he opens his mouth to speak, but I don't hear anything audibly. But out of his mouth comes out a rainbow, and it says, I am revealing myself as the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And then he wants to heal the generations. The generations need to run together. And so it's so important that we understand, that would be it right there, that we understand. You know, that we begin, like the last 10 years, we've had so much invitations from the Lord on how to grow as a church in empathy. You know, that we begin to, you know, love seeks to understand. And so it's so important to have that, to where I begin to intercede for a generation, and I begin to have some crazy stuff happen to me. I went through a pretty crazy season from 2015 to 2018. I had 3 years where it just kind of was crazy, where I dislocated my knee. I mean, basically I had 4 surgeries, lost 6 grandparents. Julia lost all of her grandparents. I lost 3. Julia lost all of her, so altogether that was 6. We had a miscarriage in 2017. Just a number of things. Somebody stole money from us, like we're talking over 15 grand. There was just a couple of just bummer moments, a couple of moments that was hard circumstances. But in the midst of that, I broke my clavicle. I was training for a half Ironman. I'm a little bit of a crazy person. I've ran marathons. I was training for this, a half Ironman. I've done some pretty crazy surf expeditions, surfed some of the craziest waves on the planet. Was surfing Monterey Bay at about 18 foot and got a hernia. That was another surgery I had. But anyways, I broke my clavicle, and they gave me a metal rod in my clavicle with screws and the whole deal. So they gave me Oxycontin. Didn't know about Oxycontin, and and I take it, and then I'm like, whoa, I'm like a prisoner of my own mind. Like I can't socialize. I can't read. I would try to read the Bible, and I'd read like 2 scriptures, and I would like, wait, what did I just read? And I have to reread it again. And so after a couple of days, I'm like, go back to the doctor. I'm like, I need something different. And he goes, no. You had super invasive surgery. You fractured and broke your clavicle in like 6 places. We had to put a metal rod in there. Like you're dealing with hardware. You need this drug. And I'm like, no, it's an opioid. It's heroin. I do not want to be taking heroin. Give me something way lower. We went back and forth 3 or 4 times, and I finally asked him, how much do you get a kickback? Do you get like an incentive for selling this? He goes, yeah, $150. And I was like, oh, I'm going to switch doctors. Like I'm just hitting, and I'm just coming from a place of authority of like I've experienced some of this stuff where like firsthand, and thank God I was I wasn't in a place of coping unhealthy or addiction or all that stuff, that I was able to address it like right away. But you can see how easy, accessible, where understanding that we as Americans, we're 5% of the world's population, and we consume 80% of opioids and SR1s. So I have next year after that, 2017, I have a miscarriage. I lost it. I was in mourning. My Julie goes, hey, you should probably go see the doctor. You're in a real bad spot. So I go to the doctor, and he's like, well, what happened? I'm like, I had a miscarriage. Like, oh, here's Prozac. And so I studied Prozac. I didn't take it. I just studied it, and I'm like, oh, wow, SR1s, antidepressants. First of all, there's no shame if you're on SR1. It's just we have over-prescribed way too much. In Canada, they're starting to prescribe before an SR1, okay, you need to spend an hour outdoors, you need to get a gym membership to get the dopamine and the serotonin and all that stuff firing naturally into neurotransmitters, because if you study SR1s, that 1/5 of those that take an SR1 for 1 year or longer, their neurotransmitters will stop firing naturally, and therefore they will be dependent on that SR1 for the rest of their life. I have multiple friends that we've been praying and contending. I have 2 out of probably over 10 that have been healed from being on SR1 for 4 or 5 years, that couldn't get off of it. And so, yes, and I'm telling you, there is a wave of healing. Like I've been feeling for this, whole deal with COVID-19. I've talked with Keith and Susan about you guys doing healing rooms, drive-through healing rooms. I absolutely love that, because I feel like there's an invitation for another wave of healing. And I think there's a healing of mental health, where we are dealing with anxiety and depression. Like suicide rates are up at an all-time high, especially those ages 15 through 30. I can't go into all this stuff. I'm just kind of shotgun blasting you. Is that okay to shotgun blast you right now? Because here's the deal, that we don't need, the reason why I'm not going to preach, don't look at the news or don't look at all that stuff. You just need to discern the spirit of fear. But we are not supposed to be, as a church, putting our heads in the sand. We need to be aware what God is doing. That's why it is important to sometimes watch the news, to not be consumed by it, but to be aware of what the enemy, what the cards the enemy is putting on the table to take out a generation. Therefore, then we have ammunition, and we are connected to heaven and connected to the Father of bringing the solutions. So, went through that thing in 2017. And then in 2018, I was in a crazy car accident. I did a very millennial thing. I took a selfie right afterwards. And so if you go on my Instagram or whatever, you could see me doing a 15-second video, being pretty out of it. Joe helped me quite a bit during that time. But what happened is I fell asleep at the wheel. Was trying to get to a meeting with Heidi Baker early in the morning, and I fell asleep at the wheel. I woke up. What happened was, I was actually driving from here to Reading, and I knew that I needed to get through Bay Area traffic. My meeting was at 9 a.m. with Heidi Baker and Will Hart, and so I was like, all right, I'm going to wake up at 2:45 in the morning and just drive. And so I knew to get out of, once I got to Vacaville, there'd be no more traffic. So if I get to Vacaville by 6:15, I'd be golden. And I knew that it would take about 2 hours and 10 minutes to get to Reading from Vacaville, because how many times I've done that trip. So I'm like, I have a 4Runner. I could just sleep in the back of the 4Runner. I barely have ever slept in the car driving. And I've driven probably from Reading to Southern California at least 200, 300 times. And I've driven cross country about 4 times. So I'm very aware, and I've driven quite a bit. I've put a lot of miles on. And so I had pretty good self-awareness. So I got to Vacaville, pretty tired. I take my alarm for 45 minutes, sleep in the back. I think I slept a good 30 minutes, get back on the road. I'm driving like an hour and 20, and I start nodding off. And I'm like, man, this is not good. I already put the windows down, all that stuff, and I just said, I'm going to pull over again. So I pulled over a second time, and I was like, I got maybe 10 minutes. So I set the alarm for 10 minutes, don't fall asleep. I'm kind of groggy, forget to put my seatbelt on. And I drive, and I put on cruise control, 74 miles per hour, and I fall asleep, and I wake up doing this, going right towards a billboard off the Highway 5. And I wake up doing this, I jerk the wheel, I hit the brake, I'm fishtailing, I get back up onto the 5. I was thinking, I gotta get back on the 5, I gotta get back on the 5. I get back on the 5, but because I was fishtailing, I'm a little sideways, and the tires catch the tread catches the pavement, and I start flipping. And I had this sudden thought of like, there's no way this is really happening. And then suddenly I feel fingers go around my chest, around my head, around my torso, around my legs, in the forming of a palm that went all the way around me. The only way to articulate what that felt like was like being in a cocoon. And then I get knocked out. When I'm knocked out, I see one of my healing angels, and he's like 100 yards away. He walks up to me slowly and confidently. He gets to about here and he smiles. And the moment he smiles, I come back to consciousness, sitting in my 4Runner. I realize I'm missing my left shoe. Like, where's my left shoe? I can't find my left shoe. And I get out kind of disoriented, and these highway patrolmen are running at me. And they said, we watched the whole thing. You flipped 5 times. You came out of your 4Runner, skipped along the 5, and was brought back in. They found my shoe like 200 yards down the road. They found my bag. They found like my 4Runner was demolished. I have road rash scars all around here. So I went to go talk to the highway patrolman, and I couldn't talk to him because there was stuff in my mouth. And I was like, oh no, my teeth. I pull out 5 rocks the size of like nickels and quarters. They were in, so I was like this, along the 5. My teeth are fine. And it was literally like I felt the hand of God, and he protected me. And it's so crazy how that reset me where I was getting barraged by the enemy. And I didn't even go into all the stuff. Like 2018 was a crazy summer.